Hello, this is Chris Goldthorpe with ChrisChess.com, and this video is going to be about something called the fork trick. A lot of chess authors have considered the position you see in front of you here after White's last move to be mistaken for White. So let's take a look at what we're talking about. We've got both of the e-pawns out, 2 squares, all 4 knights on a long diagonal, and White has his bishop out, Black does not. It's Black to move. So a lot of people here favor something called the fork trick, where Black takes this pawn, and if White takes his knight, then Black goes here and wins the piece back, one way or another. It's usually implied, and I'd always believe that this is the best thing for Black to do. I'm aware that, like many, that it's not giving Black any huge advantage, but we usually talk about the fact that if White takes this pawn, justifying it by saying, well, I'm going to lose a piece anyway. Of course, he could lose a knight instead of a bishop by dropping back to d3, as we'll see in a minute. But if he takes and the queen takes, Black has the bishop pair. According to Alex Dunn, who was a world correspondence champion and about a 2400 player who trained a lot of amateurs, he said, usually a player's got to be at least near expert strength to make full use of the bishop pair as an advantage. So in games of players weak enough that these openings actually come up with any frequency, I don't know that the pair of bishops for Black is going to be much of an advantage in practice anyway. The computer gives this plus 0.32. If you've tutored kids in chess, you know that an advantage of 0.32 pawns is every bit as durable as a sand castle. In other words, not very durable. So this seems to be about the best that Black can do. There's other lines here for White. Going back to before the bishop takes pawn, we have what is apparently the best line is actually bishop d3. So we'll go with that. So I'm going to show you 2 other variations first, and let's see which one do we think is worse. This one, bishop to b5, pinning the knight. Now Black gets a knight, and here both sides got a knight and a pawn, where queen d5 and queen g5 are both somewhat interesting. Queen d5 seems to not be as well for Black, according to all the engines. So we got Stockfish, Houdini, Deep Fritz, they all say queen g5. And it looks like a good move to a human. Look, these are unguarded, this is unguarded, this is unguarded. So he could play d4, or he could take this knight with either of these 2 pieces. Let's take a look at d4, which guards the knight, but that allows the queen to come crashing in here, and White's got to save this thing, and a move that follows this would normally be like bishop here. Let's see, is there a problem with this move now? Because it gives bishop d6 as best, even with some strong engines going very far ahead. Oh yeah, knight takes knight. Let's see, he takes the rook. That doesn't work because the bishop is still guarding it. So bishop d6 is actually Now, why that wouldn't allow him to go here might be a bit of a mystery. A6 counterattacks the bishop. Bishop d7 works. But as you can see, this is pretty dicey. And this is showing up about -1 for black. So this is not really a route that white should try to go on, this bishop g5 move. So bishop d3 is what he should play. After takes, guards the pawn, and castles. White still has an advantage. Tiny one. But if we compare this to what he gets in the normal line after the 4 knights game, after he well, let's look at just plain old f6. You know, he's at like 0.28 here if he plays knight g5 compared to the 0.15 here. We're talking a difference of 1/10 of a pawn, which is just about insignificant even between Class A players. So yeah, this is the move that it likes best. Of course, d4 is playable here, but I'm not going to turn this into a discussion of how to play against the 2 knights defense. There are other very good videos on that. But after this move, it appears that knight c3 is not really all that bad. Also, when I had it sit on this position for quite a while, almost all of the engines like bishop c5 anyway. So when we look at this as far as openings book, here knight c3 really doesn't get good marks. But in practice, it doesn't seem to do too badly. Knight c3 gives question mark. It's obviously very much a minority among the moves made here. And white scores the lowest percentage out of all these other moves here. Of course, that doesn't always mean anything. So a little quick statistical analysis. You see, I just did that in 2 seconds. When we have the 4 knights game move order and then the bishop comes out, at the point where the bishop comes out, bishop to b5 is white's strongest move as far as the percentage of wins or percentage of scoring for white. Bishop c4, by far the lowest. Here's the 50% mark. We expect white to get above that. Of these 5 moves surveyed here, 2 were below par, g3 and bishop to c4. Both of those that prepare an alternative to the best bishop deployment. Now, the 2 knights defense move order. When we look at the other moves besides knight c3 is clearly the worst performer and consequently the least often chosen. So it does seem to have a problem, possibly just because of the reputation that it has, because these engines are not favoring black playing knight takes e4. Not really. They often say bishop c5 is just as good. So running through, another variation is where white just turns this into a gambit and castles. And this one does almost as badly as the bishop b5 line. So he takes back this way to open up lines for the bishop and for the queen. And then this strange move is made to prevent this bishop move and to keep the knight from getting to f7. That's why the major alternative here is h6, which also keeps the knight off of g5. I think he really wants to put his dark squared bishop like on c5. That's why he does not just play bishop e7. Okay, white threatens the checkmate. Black guards against it. And this is just about equal. No big problem for white. And of course, if white has studied this line and gone into it intentionally in practice, he may have that going for him as well. So again, the conclusion is the fork trick is very much not so significant as a quote-unquote mistake. And it's certainly not clear, as you can see here, that knight takes e4 is best. Now, Stockfish at a depth of 45 says knight takes e4. I don't know if that's enough reason for me to tell a beginner who plays bishop c5 that they made the wrong move. Although knight takes e4, if they learn those variations, they will certainly be in a very dangerous jungle with their opponent who's probably less prepared than they are for it. Knight takes e4 might be the best move here, but you can see where we can say maybe not. It's certainly not clear enough that we can say that bishop c5 is not a good move here. But when we look at these stats here, that's what it looks like. It could be too that if there is a strong impression that a certain move is a mistake, and strong players believe that, they're going to tend to win their games because they're strong players, and the people who play the quote-unquote bad move, even if it really is good, are not going to score as well with it. But you can get lost in statistics all day long and not come up with any reliable conclusions. So that's why I would dissuade you from spending too much time on statistics here. So that's where we stand on the two knights defense. So if black wants to try this line, if you are the white pieces, actually go ahead and take with the knight. That's your best chance. And then on this, bishop to d3 is white's best. And then we end up here. And after we've boiled it all down, that's about all you really need to know. Both sides castle here. I've been asked what happens if, let's say, black plays this move. I mean, that seems reasonable, right? I think you see a good move. Yep, this prevents castling by black. And as soon as the d-pawn moves, I imagine knight here will be an option for white as well. So the f5 move is not really all that scary. So there you have it. If white plays knight c3, I'd say it may cost him as much as 0.15 of a pawn. And I only say that because I'm just believing these engines, which in the final analysis, if they really knew, they wouldn't give a numeric estimate. They would either say it was mate in a certain number of moves or that it was drawn, the way an endgame table base does. So we know even with the computer, we're speculating. So it is good to recognize the situation, at least recognize what the fork trick is. When you get to this position via the Italian game, we start here, Italian game, two knights defense, and then let's say c3. That's one way we get to it. The other way we get to it in practice, in the games of the kids who are at a level where this might actually come up, and all good players here, they're going to play d4 or they're going to play bishop to b5. Interesting here is that this move, which Tal Shaked once played in a U.S. Juniors Championship, black can go here. It's kind of neat, the reason why the fork trick doesn't work here. Because if white goes here, black just says, thanks for the free pawn. Of queen better not take the bishop, because if it does, we have the fork. Okay, so that's one little aspect of it, this g3 move that leaves f3 unguarded. So you can't do the fork trick if your own bishop is out here, but it is worthwhile to recognize it. And then here's where this is where the fork trick is possible. So there is a gambit, which you just saw, the castles, Kaiseretsky gambit, to deal with that. But in the end, that's one of the worst variations, just almost as bad as bishop g5. So the bishop d3 line for white is the best he's got, and then he's at maybe 0.15 instead of 0.3. Probably the next time I see a kid play bishop c5, I'm going to tell him to look up the fork trick, and that's all I'm going to say. For some reason, kids never recognize this position. You can show it to them 100 times in a row, and they still don't recognize it. Or they'll go here when there's no white knight on e4. And, of course, that doesn't make sense. White's got 3 against 2. He just takes the pawn. Of course. I mean, why would anybody do that? That's just silly. So no, that's d5 is not the right answer. So you can play bishop c5 here. You could take the pawn. If you take the pawn, make sure you understand these variations. For black, at lower levels, you want to know what to do when white castles or plays bishop b5, the inferior variations. If he takes the pawn with the bishop, it's a pretty calm position anyway. And if he castles, that's not good for him. Bishop d3 is white's main line here. So, having said that, I actually wouldn't even recommend the two knights defense anymore. Sorry, Arthur Bisgeier. When white plays this, I would recommend for black to just play the Gioco piano, but of course there's nothing wrong with the two knights. So that should cover all you need to know about the fork trick. If you're ready for lessons, go to chrischess.com. It's got all of my contact information, and we can set up lessons on Skype, especially if you're an ICC member. That makes it even better. If you're not and you want to become a member of the ICC, go to chessclub.com and sign up there. Thanks very much. Thanks for listening.